In this chapter, we'll talk about what rent control tries to do. Remember that a rent control law can take different forms, but in almost every form, it is trying to govern the amount of rent that a tenant pays. So it might be a very strict absolute freeze on the level of the rent. For instance, the rent can never rise above $500. Or it might be, and this is more common, a regulation that says the rent cannot rise by more than a certain percent each year. For instance, the rent can't rise by more than 2 or 3% each year. Why do we have laws like this? People make all sorts of different arguments for rent control, but I think most of them can be categorized into three broad categories. And the first one is that rent control could potentially help advance housing affordability. It could help some people who would not otherwise be able to afford housing in a given place, whether it's New York or San Francisco or St. Paul, be able to afford it. And this is important because renters, as I mentioned earlier, tend to be lower income than homeowners. In the United States, the typical renter has, on average, about half the income of a homeowner, and most low-income Americans rent rather than own their homes, and that housing is a big expense for them. The second potential benefit, which I think is related to the first one, is that rent control could prevent displacement and stabilize a neighborhood. If you imagine a neighborhood where lots of people are feeling pressure from rising rents, and then as a result, many of them move out and get replaced by higher income people, you don't just have, as a result of that, a situation where lots of people individually suffer from high rents. You also have a dramatic change in the composition of the neighborhood itself. And that's something that many cities are concerned about, and a rent control offers one potential way to slow or prevent such displacement from happening. And the third benefit is that a rent control can function as a form of social insurance. It can protect renters from sudden, dramatic spikes in rent. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but I think that this is, to sort of preview the results, the most compelling argument for rent control. When we talk about gentrification and displacement and affordability, there are other ways, at least conceivably, to deal with those issues. You could have, for instance, means-tested programs like housing vouchers or affordable housing programs that both help lower-income people afford their rent and also prevent displacement from happening by protecting people from rent increases in a certain area. But one of the big differences between renting and owning in the United States is the fact that owners have a lot of certainty about their housing costs. If you sign a standard mortgage when you buy a house, in most instances, you know 20 or 30 years out what your monthly payment is going to be. And knowing that offers a form of safety net that renters don't have. Most rent contracts are only about a year long, and sometimes they're even month to month. And what that means is that the price of a renter's housing can actually rise dramatically in very short notice, which can have devastating consequences because, again, rent is often such a large component of a household's budget. And so you have these three arguments for rent control: affordability, preventing displacement, and then providing social insurance to renters, a form of safety net. And let me add a fourth benefit to this that's sometimes come up, which is that rent control offers the possibility of accomplishing these goals quickly and at minimal fiscal cost, and that can make them very appealing to city leaders. And what I mean when I say that is that, again, a lot of these benefits of rent control could conceivably be accomplished in other ways. If you have many low-income people in your city who have trouble affording housing because they have low incomes, then of course you could help them through a housing voucher or some other targeted redistribution program that just gets them money. And similarly, if you think the price of housing is rising too fast and as a result you're getting gentrification and displacement, the most obvious solution to that is to just build a lot more housing. And lastly, even the social insurance benefit does not have to be done through a rent control. It's not impossible to imagine a government, perhaps a state or the national government, setting up an actual social insurance program for renters, similar to unemployment insurance or other forms of social insurance that we have, that would help protect them if for some reason their rent spiked dramatically. All of those would probably be a more efficient way to deal with these problems. But the fact of the matter is that they would be very expensive, they would take a lot of time, or both. They would probably also involve a lot of political opposition. And so if you are a city leader, and you're in a city where rents are rising dramatically, where the typical voter doesn't want to see a lot more housing built, and where your budget is tight, and it's not feasible to say that you could really dramatically increase redistribution or set up a social insurance program, the idea of controlling rents by just writing a law, by just with the stroke of a pen saying that rents can't rise anymore, is very appealing. And I think this fourth benefit of rent control, the idea that you can accomplish these other goals quickly and at minimal cost, helps explain why it is so appealing to a lot of municipal leaders and activists.